I want to thank everyone at 121 for hosting this conference. We, as a company and me personally, I rarely attend conferences and sponsor even less, but this is one of the really interesting and unique formats, so we're thankful that these guys put it on, and we're really proud to sponsor the event. So, guys, thank you for putting this together. It's always interesting to me that one of the largest sectors globally, but certainly in the US, of property is something that's called multifamily residential. That accounts for 19% of the US economy, multi-trillion in debt financing, and not too many people outside the US have ever heard about it. And it's strange because when I say multifamily, people say, what does that mean? Does that mean you have multiple families living in one apartment building? Is that your strategy? It can be a little confusing. Americans are not so good with the English language, as a lot of the English and Australians found that out. But it's actually multiple dwelling units under one roof, where single family is one dwelling unit. It's a fancy word for apartments, and in our case, rental apartments, which is what we do. We started the business in 1991, but the business has been active and robust in the US since the 50s and 60s, and considered the safest, most counter-cyclical defensive asset class in real estate. It also requires the least talent and intelligence, which is why I'm uniquely qualified to do it. So it's perfect. It is a commodity-like asset class in that we benefit from scale, and the development is fairly programmatic, although as a company, and a lot of our competitors, the large-scale residential REITs, we don't tend to do a lot of development because it's a risk-averse asset class by nature. So we will either do a select development or partner up with merchant builders who sort of specialize in efficiently building these types of buildings. We forward fund. But our real niche is value add, finding older inventory, acquiring it, at a stabilized basis. Usually our acquisitions are all north of 90%. We buy them with a solid running yield. I think in the US market today, it's a 5% cap rate. Where we expanded in the UK, it's between 4 and 5%. Interestingly enough, as we're expanding the company into mainland China, we're seeing potential 6 or 7. And I think the capitalization rate of this asset class, by the way, it is by far the lowest in the U.S., starting with, I would say, 9 or 10s in hotels, going down to, in New York, a rental apartment building, if you can find it, you'll buy it a 3 cap in San Francisco because it is so defensive and so predictable. Why? These are large-scale buildings on anywhere between 2 and 1,000 units, all self-contained management, vertically integrated with companies like ours. Not furnished, so don't confuse it with service departments. Tend to be long-term leases, on average 12 months, and tends to be our renters' primary and largest payment. It is sort of the interim step for somebody out of college or university or even a workforce housing before they go buy a home. I think the inventory in the US is about 25 million true multifamily units. It's massive. Dovetail that to the UK, it's probably 5.5 million. Now, I think the only thing that I've figured out is why this is such a nascent industry and asset class in other places, and why it's so robust and consolidated in the US is owning and operating a single flat or apartment or a couple of them is very inefficient. You have tremendous gross to net leakage. If you now are running essentially a commercialized apartment building where you have 200 to 300, 400 units, your efficiencies are much better. You can be much more professional. You can offer amenities. You can offer a gym, a business center, a fitness center, have a full-time on-site staff, so if something's broken, the maintenance man usually there and fix it in 24 hours, and it creates much greater yields and stabilities. So what the Americans, which I think some of us are pretty good at, have figured out, well, this is a great financial product. So where in Hong Kong or other places in the world, a developer will build an apartment building and sell off the apartments to sometimes owner-occupiers or investors who will rent those out. The Americans have figured out keeping the building owned under professional management, institutional ownership, but selling off the yield is a far more efficient way to give investors exposure to yielding residential asset class. In simple parlance, we don't sell the cow, we keep the cow and sell the milk rather than selling the cow and chopping up for steaks. And we found that the milk is way more valuable and in demand and repeatable than once you got to figure out the next deal to develop. It's also less risky. So I could never figure out in 2002 why this asset class didn't exist outside of the U.S. So we expanded the business model and I think helped pioneer the industry in the UK. If it wasn't for this little global financial catastrophe between now and then, we would have had significantly more business. But the business took a pause, and we're on our 1,000th unit and are seeing things come to cycle. But acting exactly the same as we predicted they would in the U.S. Look, let's face it, as I said earlier, it's 4 walls and a ceiling. We're McDonald's, we're Starbucks. Then how do you apply retail skills like customer service? You'll notice I haven't mentioned that the people that live in our buildings are tenants. They're not. We don't see them as tenants. We see them as residents. We see them as customers. And in a very competitive environment like the U.S., where the same multi-billion-dollar property company owns the building next to you or across the street, and in some places like Houston where we have no planning restriction, you can build anything you want, anytime you want, it's very efficient and very competitive. So you have to, if everybody's got the same widget, you got to be way more efficient with your management and your customer service and pliable. So, applying those skill sets to the world is what we're doing, and one of the reasons we're in Hong Kong. Quietly, I think my bankers aren't here, so they're not going to be mad at me, but we are pursuing a Hong Kong public listing, and probably will be the first American company, property company, to list on the Hong Kong Exchange, and the only pure residential specialist where maybe we could introduce this asset class into Hong Kong. Yields are tight, land is tight. It's tough to make a deal work when you're developing to a 3 cap. But we see Hong Kong as a natural global base. As big as the U.S. market is, the investors are still very, very provincial in their outlook on where they want to invest in multifamily, not sort of understanding that we've been very successful in that we've acquired, developed, redeveloped, managed through our cycle about 85 to 90,000 units in the U.S. from Las Vegas to the west all the way around. Having a large national portfolio probably saved us through the crash. And again, people always needed places to live. So even though, in 2009 we were probably 150% leveraged, given the real values, the fact of the matter is we were still, paying the mortgage and had a nice yield. So as long as the debt wasn't expiring, companies like ours were the last ones into the recessions, the first ones out, especially when people couldn't buy homes. So as economies emerge, as they need to become more efficient, this asset class is desperately needed. And I think a lot of people would argue the reason that the U.S. economy is so resilient, is so robust, is because we have this housing inventory where anybody in this room can go to any city in the U.S. today, in 24 hours, get a criminal background check from the landlord and move into an apartment. No questions asked. If you want to move, you wait till the lease expires or buy yourself out of the lease, then move to Dallas, move to Houston, and have thousands of buildings to choose from that all have a fitness center, all have a pool, all have a barbecue place, all have a business center, all have shiny, happy people in the office to welcome you. So we're very excited to be one of the first apartment companies to expand globally. We're obviously very bullish on Hong Kong. Americans are used to be rebel rousers, so what's going on in the street doesn't really bother us, and it'll all come down. But we hope you come meet our staff. We've got everyone from around the world here, our China, UK, and managing director. And if you want to know more about our company and industry, and probably best to do it over drinks tonight. Will be much more interesting that way. So, thanks everybody.